If you're new to film, let me put you on to one of the most influential films of all time, Seven Samurai. It came out in 1954, but like a lot of recent films, it's a whopping 3.5 hours. But don't let that fool you. It's exciting the whole time, and you'll be hooked even up to the intermission. Since then, there have been several remakes, countless references, and even tropes that have been created from that film and repeated since then. Many of the filmmakers in Hollywood consider this film to be the backbone of any action film to hit the big screen since 1954. It's about a village in the 15th century Japan that hires seven samurai to defend itself against bandits threatening to steal the village's resources. Typically, I'm not a fan of war movies, or frankly, most of the action films in Hollywood, but I found that the example of this film actually lends itself to a lot of techniques that communities, especially marginalized communities of today, can use to their advantage. To stay on theme, let's talk about 7 things I learned from watching Seven Samurai. Number 1, the importance of getting rid of fear. We're dealing with a village of laborers who cannot depend on the defense of their government to help them defend themselves against oppressors. Many marginalized groups in history and today often feel as if their governments don't aid protection and are often more of a threat than anything else. Without the power of wealth or status, these groups also find themselves in dangerous situations. This dynamic creates a group of people that is being attacked from all sides, so it's no surprise that this leaves them in fear. In the first act of the film, the samurai discussed the mindset of the farmers and remarked that all farmers ever do is worry, despite the conditions that they live in. Although the situation is very real, I do believe this dynamic is what keeps oppressed people living in a constant state of fear and therefore believing that they have no options. This keeps the working class complacent, depressed, and pessimistic. What I've gathered as a strategy from this parallel is that it is most important for the working class to change their mindset to believe that they can do something to change their situation despite the constant fear that they live in. In Seven Samurai, they come up with the idea of hiring their own fighters. The line here states that no matter the weather, the farmers are still scared, and that shows the limited vision of the workers. What I'm saying is, no matter how they're doing, they do not see their successes. If you do not see your successes, you cannot see your strengths. The antidote to this, of course, is to battle first your fear so that you can see your options, and second, to celebrate your successes with gratitude so you know where your real power lies. My second point is that oppressed people need to come together despite their differences and through a dedication to forgiveness. One of the most powerful scenes to me is when the samurai are given equipment that the farmers took from samurai that they had defeated. Of course, the samurai are offended by this, and it makes them question the people that they're helping. At first, they chose the narrative that these were innocent farmers who needed help of these powerful men who were gifting them as well as showing off their talents. From this point, it's clear that it has always been every man for himself, and that really these groups, the samurai, the bandits, and the farmers, are all separated as enemies by the mere fact that they're there for their own self-interests. For me, this really reminded me of the rise of cancel culture and the realization that there are so many marginalized groups that have hurt each other because at the end of the day, they're there for themselves. They're there to survive. We as a society have been holding marginalized groups to the highest standard of moral code that ironically their oppressors have had handed to them. And when a person or a group breaks that fantasy that people are flawed, conflict between the groups ensues. We lose loyalty. We don't band together, and in the end, we lose numbers. In this sense, it makes sense to me that the answer to victory will always be the power of banding together. And like the samurai and the farmers, forgiveness, mercy, and being realistic is the force that will bring victory. The last line of the movie, however, really sends the message that only the farmers benefited, but it's up to us, to the viewers, to decide if that is something that they deserved. The third lesson is how to keep your resolve as a group. In the second half of the film, where the action ensues, as you would expect during this trajectory, there are casualties. What I noticed is that when there were casualties among the farmers, the village would erupt in chaos and despair. They would leave their stations and neglect orders and in general lose their resolve. The samurai at this point clamored to regain control and continue with their plan. Likewise, when there were losses amongst the samurai would lose their resolve and even pause fighting to mourn their own losses. During those losses, it seems that the farmers were able to keep it together. This really reminds me of how, due to social media, we have been able to see some of the violence of war and domestic strife. This also happened during the Vietnam War, when television had made its way onto the main stage of technology. The effect this can have on communities is to traumatize. For the communities that are directly affected, watching such violence can be debilitating and even serve as more of a warning than a reason to act. However, communities that aren't directly affected have no issue in sharing these posts and talking about the violence. The strategy that I'm gleaning from this phenomenon is not to completely censor violence, but when one group is grieving, other groups need to be acting, or at least in a state of defense. Number 4, let's focus on community. One of the main differences I see in Seven Samurai versus the American films that took from it is that it almost completely is an ensemble cast. In American films, even if we are following the trope that this movie created of assembling a team, there usually is still a hero or a main character to follow, root for, and that we expect to lead us into victory. I like the ensemble nature of this film because it teaches us that success for communities doesn't lie in its leader, but lies in the power of its people. It is my opinion that people of the West, through celebrity culture or idolization in general, often expect our leaders to save us. They expect our leaders to make all the perfect decisions for us and deliver us to victory. We want a hero. In Seven Samurai, there are 7 heroes and a community of heroes backing them. The wisdom that comes from anyone who's accomplished anything of note is that someone can't do it for you. We must all play a part, recognize our strengths, and distribute our different strengths as needed. I feel like a good strategist knows that the pawn is just as important as the queen. Number 5, celebrations often serve as distractions. The samurai are having a funeral service when they're attacked in this film. Also, a notable line is, when you feel the safest is when you are the most vulnerable. Funeral services are a community event, a celebration of sorts, so it of course is advantageous for the bandits to attack when the community focuses on each other and not them. What we're saying here is that celebrations are good distractions. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that celebrations aren't needed. For, as I mentioned earlier, they're an important part of maintaining camaraderie, gratitude, respect, and respite. However, during times of war, I think it would have been better for the farmers to celebrate in secret, or if anything, they should have created a decoy to make them look defensive. Overall, the message here is, when we are celebrating, what are we not paying attention to? Number 6, when you can, limit the vision of your enemy. Let's talk about technicalities. The final battle of this wonderful film is very iconic and referenced a lot by using rain during battle. The farmers had a home team advantage in these skirmishes because they were battling on their own land. Because it's raining, obviously both sides have limited vision. The way that the farmers and the samurai use this to their advantage is that they could use long-range weaponry from inside their buildings, meaning that they had clear vision where their enemies did not. A lot can be grasped from this as a technical strategy, but I will say, to me, it represents knowledge. The key to victory is battling in an arena where you have a lot of knowledge and your enemy has very little. So, for example, if your enemy is quite old and doesn't understand technology, a younger opponent who does understand technology and trends would have a lot more vision. It's important to attack when they can't see you. My last point, strategy, whatever, is that women are important. As a feminist writer, we knew I'd make it to this point. But this movie did show me the value of women. The movie sort of reminded me that in times of struggle, women are a resource. Of course, there's S work, but also women are usually the laborers and provide in many ways for the community. When we look at the weaknesses of the farmers and the samurai, it seems to me that the most valuable resource was the women. Not only were the women the laborers, but their decision of who to have S with was ultimately what brought harmony or struggle between the samurai and the farmers. The farmers were often scared that the women would be interested in the samurai, and in the third act it was considered a major breach of loyalty that a woman chose to have relations with one. This caused a lot of strife between the samurai and the farmers. All this proved to me is that the women of the village actually had a lot more power than a lot of these men, merely dependent upon their quote-unquote loyalty. My point here, as always, is women need to understand their power and that there is a lot more victory in a community that empowers and deserves the loyalty of its women. Happy wife, happy life. If they wanted to, the women could have ruined this entire movie. That's value, and that needs to be paid attention to.